Hey everybody, good to be with you, at least virtually. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. Was really hoping I'd be able to, but things didn't work out for this year to be at Texas CyberCon. So happy to be here, talk about threat hunting, becoming a threat hunter. And I started looking at this, go, this is the way. And then I realized, no, it's really not the way. It is just one way of becoming a threat hunter that I wanted to talk to you all about today. As a little bit of background about myself, my name is Jason Wood. I'm a senior researcher on the Overwatch threat hunting team. Basically, I'm on what we call our outreach team. Actually, it's part of Overwatch. That allows me to get out and do conferences like this and participate in the public a bit more. And so I really enjoy this opportunity to be here with you. As far as my past background, I was one of the threat hunters on the Overwatch team, focused on e-crime. And I've been in penetration testing and worked as a sysadmin and then later a security engineer. I also do podcasting. You can catch me on Security Weekly News most weeks, where I do commentary there. And you can always get a hold of me on Twitter at Jason_Wood. So here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to start off with getting started doing threat hunting. What are some of the preparatory steps that we're going to do? We're going to talk about the lab. What environment do you want to practice in? And what's some options out here for you? And I've got a pretty good one I think you'd be interested in trying out. We're going to discuss the attacks. And yes, I'm referring to Mitre Attack and how we can use that to dig into what adversaries are doing. We'll talk a little bit about some threat intel there and how that can inform us to give us basically hypotheses to go hunting for and how we can practice that. And then we're going to do the hunt. We're going to take a look at just an example. I'm going to try and do my best here to work through that on a virtual machine and demonstrate some basic hunting and considerations around that. And then finally, we're going to talk about next steps. And really here, we're just talk about where we go from there. How do we maybe some things we're looking for in threat hunters that maybe could help you move into that type of position if you like. So one of the things I always like to stop and talk about is what is threat hunting itself. Because, well, marketing's gotten a hold of this thing and it can mean just about anything to any company. It depends on who you're talking to. Really, threat hunting is the idea that, and we've got a formal definition you can see here, but threat hunting is the idea that adversaries get around defenses. We have clever thinking opponents out there on the other side, trying to break into our environments, trying to do ransomware, trying to collect information, steal intellectual property, all kinds of stuff. And they figure out how to get around security software. Threat hunters, their goal is to actively go out and look for them, and basically assume a breach and look for the techniques, the tactics used by adversaries, and hunt through their environment looking for that. Now, there's three different ways that we can do that. And we're going to be talking mostly about the hypothesis side of things, but there's still some useful, we're going to also talk about threat intelligence as well. Now, one here at CrowdStrike, we use a lot of statistical methods and analysis because we collect a lot of data and we're able to basically helps us find the outliers. But that's not going to really probably help us in our lab environment here for practicing. So what we're going to focus on is kind of the hypothesis type of testing where you're like, hey, here's how adversaries attack systems. Let's see if we can find that. And then the behaviors, the techniques, the tactics, techniques, and procedures. And we'll also talk a little bit about some threat intel and how that can help us out. But that's what we use here inside of CrowdStrike. These are the kind of the three things that we use in Overwatch for our threat hunting, really at scale 24/7. Now, when we talk about what threat hunting is, maybe we should talk a little bit about what it's not. This is not a SOC. We're not waiting for something to go red and tell us, hey, something malicious has happened here. We're actually out proactively looking for things, even though the environment may be quiet. And SOCs are really focused on the idea of, hey, they do not want false positives. If something goes red, it better be malicious. Threat hunting, we are willing to accept more noise in what we're doing. We're willing to spend time hunting on a technique only to come up dry and realize, okay, we didn't have that in our environment. That's good. Let's step back and see if we can form a new hypothesis and go again. So this is what we're doing. We're not reacting to things. We're out here actively looking for adversaries in our environments. This isn't part of the schedule, just looking through logs and just kind of just check, check, check. Again, we'll use logs, we'll use things that are in event logs or whatever, and events that are occurring on systems, but we're not going to use this this is not part of log review process. Now, when we look at threat hunters, really we come from all kinds of different backgrounds. We've got the blue teamers who come from either being systems administrators or security engineers, security analysts. They're actively tasked with doing defense in their environments, forensics folks, for example. And that's one side of where we can get into threat hunting. The other side, and this is kind of where I came into threat hunting, was from the red team side of things, or the offense. I was actually doing penetration testing, did that for quite a while, was really pretty familiar with the attacks, but I wanted to look on the other side and see, hey, how do we hunt for adversaries in environments? So we do come from all kinds of backgrounds to get to this point, and I don't think there's any one way or any one background that is more right than any other to get into threat hunting. There are some different things that we have, as far as our backgrounds that help us in that process. Blue team, we really kind of know what environments are already supposed to look like. How are they supposed to operate? What's going on here? This is expected or it's not expected, because we've set this up and we're constantly monitoring our environment, so we kind of know what the normal noise level is. But you know what? There are always gaps. Systems out there that we didn't know existed. They get found by adversaries sometimes, and they get in. So we're looking for gaps in our monitoring, gaps in our inventory of devices, things like that, to try and hunt things down. And on defense, we hear about a lot of these attacks. We hear the explanation about what they're for, but maybe we're not quite as familiar what they are. And maybe not even more so familiar with what the attacks that adversaries are actually using, because there is a little bit of a difference between attacks that we get tossed around and that are really cool and neat, and then attacks that are just kind of adversaries' bread and butter. We also may not know what they look like inside of our monitoring, right? So that is also something we want to take a look at. Now, the red team side of things, we're much more familiar with the attacks themselves. And, we know really how to use them, and we know what we can do with them, and that's great. But we may not be familiar with how they appear in the monitoring side of things. That was my experience. I came in as a penetration tester. I knew how these tools worked. I knew what I could do with them and why it was dangerous if this worked. But how does it show up in an event log? Well, I don't know, or I didn't know. And so I had to dig into that and do some research to prepare myself to become a threat hunter. And honestly, we get used to what we use and what works and what's really clever or whatnot in our testing. Adversaries, again, they have what they're going to be using. And sometimes I was really surprised as you look at adversaries and how they operate, how different it was from what I did in penetration testing, because just what they were willing to do or what they found was work. They didn't have to be clever. It just had to be good enough to be successful. So our goal here to become a threat hunter is we need to get familiar with the attacks that adversaries are actually using. We need to know what they look like in the monitoring systems we have. We need to know where the detections or the information, not even detections, but the events that are related to that, where are they being logged? Are they being picked up in Zeek with some network telemetry and session information or whatnot, or is it showing up in the Windows event log or syslog file on our endpoints? And we need to become, this is really important, we need to become comfortable with how we're looking for them. Threat hunting takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of practice to get familiar with that. So we need to get used to digging into that. And that means, hey, we need to know what the resulting data is. If I run a command to do reconnaissance on the computers in an environment, what does that look like? And where would I find that? What tools am I going to use to find them? Now, we're going to look at some tools in the lab itself, but really we're going to be focused. I want to get used to the process so that you can take this and then turn it into whatever tools you're using inside of your environment. Or you can adapt that. Let's say you become a full-time threat hunter somewhere. You can adapt that to the tool set that you're using in that environment. So that's kind of our background. We're getting started here. Now we need to have an environment to actually test this stuff out in and try out some hunting. So the lab we're going to use is called Detection Lab, and it's a great project built by a gentleman named Chris Long. And the reason why I really like this environment or this build is because it allows us to automatically build a Windows domain environment. It gives us a domain controller, event collection system on Windows. It gives us a Windows 10 desktop and then a Linux logging system that has a lot of tools for us to use to collect that data and do some analysis on that. We can deploy this onto a desktop using whatever virtualization you like, or you can deploy it out to AWS or Microsoft Azure. So really useful there. We just spin this up and get it going. It's basically built with Vagrant. I'm not going to dive into that for the purposes of this talk, but this is what we're going to be using. Now here are the machines and their roles that we have in this environment. We've got the logger. Logger is the host name. It's running Splunk Enterprise with a limit on how much data it can ingest per day, but it's free and ready to go. You've got Suricata and Zeek for network information, and Apache Guacamole allows us to do some remote desktop from the Linux, from a web interface running on the Linux system into our different environments. We've also got the WEF server, and that one's running Microsoft ATA, or Advanced Threat Analytics, and it's a domain member server. It's a part of the domain. We've got the domain controller. It's got a pre-built Active Directory domain ready to go for us. It's also got a number of tools deployed into it, like Atomic Red Team and Mimikatz and etc. So this is where we can look at setting up tools to run, as well as on the Windows 10 machine. It's also a member of the domain, and it's just a basic Windows 10 host. Got tools that we can deploy out on it, test our attacks out, see how they show up inside of our logging data. So with that, we'll take a look at those machines here in a bit when we get to maybe a little bit of a demo, but that's our environment we're going to be operating in. Next, let's take a look at the attacks that we're going to be learning about here and learning how to hunt. And so we're going to focus initially here around Mitre Attack. And this is a really cool project. You've probably heard it all over the place from marketing. But we use it a lot here inside of Overwatch because it allows us to track what adversaries are doing and give us a common language to talk to folks about it, about what adversaries are doing, how are they operating, what is their goal, and things like that. A lot of great information in there. It helps us to answer questions like, hey, how did the adversary get in? So, there are techniques that allow us to map to that. Again, I can describe that. What commands did they execute in there, and how did they execute them inside of the environment? How did they go about maintaining persistence in the environment? What did they do to evade defenses? And, finally, at the end of the day, what did they actually do? I mean, like, what goals were they trying to accomplish? Were they trying to collect credentials or exfiltrate data and ransom a system? So what is it that they actually try to do? So let's go ahead and take a look at the Mitre Attack website real quick. So this is the Mitre Attack matrix, if you will. It is absolutely ginormous. And it got bigger last year when they added sub techniques, but that helped us get more granular in what it is we're tracking on the adversaries. But you can see it starts out here from reconnaissance, resource development, initial access, execution, how they do persistence, privilege escalation, et cetera, defense evasion, and then finally we get out here over to how they did command and control and exfiltrate data and what was the impact to the environment. And we can dig down into this, like let's say for credential harvesting. They went for operating system credential dumping. We can dig into that, and this is where we get into the techniques around harvesting credentials through LSAS, memory space, or from NTDS, the Active Directory environment. Let's say we're looking at LSAS memory because we're going to kind of focus on that a little bit here in our demo. And so I click on LSAS memory, has a description of how this can be done, it gives you some tips on how commands that can be run by adversaries, and I see this all the time. To be quite honest with you, here we've got proc dump being used, or we got Mimikatz, run DLL32 to do it. And then finally we get down here towards the bottom and we have the examples of threat actors that are actually using this. And so let's say APT41, Okay, they've used Hashdump, Mimikatz, and Windows Credential Editor to get access to it. Well, what else have they done? Because I'm kind of interested in hunting on what they did. Well, now I can look at the group, and then here are all the different techniques associated with them. And again, we can use that to inform us back over to what the different techniques are, and then we could look at look for examples of those commands, turn around, play them inside of Detection Lab, and then we're off. We can get familiar with how the commands run, how they execute. That helps us become better defenders because we understand what's going on and what the impact of these tools are, but also see how they look in the defensive side, and then we can refine our hunt on that. So that's what we can do there with Mitre Attack. Again, you'll see this used all over the place, but it's really, it just gives us this verbiage to talk about, hey, what did the adversary do? What type of stuff did they do to infiltrate this environment? And we could say, okay, well, they got in via, let's say, a phishing attack, and they used a command and scripting interpreter to launch PowerShell. From there, they did credential harvesting using LSASS. They did some discovery commands, and let's see, they exfiltrated the data out over the C2 channel, for example. So that's, kind of gives us a flow to talk about this. So that's why I like to use this. And what I would recommend you doing is, like I said, just go through this flow. You could even go up here to groups and say, hey, I want to focus on a particular threat actor group. And let's go after APT12 here. And we can click into that. And again, see all of the techniques associated with them that have been recorded. And then we could pivot back up to see, what techniques could we try out. So with some familiarity around the attack framework and the matrix associated with it, let's take a look at some threat intel, or where we can rather get threat intel to help guide us on what attackers are doing. And really, a lot of security companies are producing threat intel or threat hunting reports that we can then turn around and use to just kind of get a picture of, hey, what is currently happening, and can you give me some examples of it? So, this is going to be one thing to keep in mind as you're looking at the reports for a given company. This is going to be the data that they can see, that they have access to. Now, that may be through threat hunting activity that they're monitoring, let's say as part of a managed service like Overwatch, or you may get something like purely a threat intel platform where people have honeypots and other systems out there and methods of seeing what adversaries are up to, and talking about the different types of techniques or the motives or the trends that they're seeing there. Regardless, all of this is just going to be what each of these companies can see, and you're going to see some variance between the different companies based on that data set, which is pretty reasonable and expected. Typically in these reports, you're going to see examples of the actual attacks and what do they look like, how do they play out. And they'll tell you, hey, here's kind of, what we saw the attacker achieve with this, or what they attempted to achieve with this. Here's where we're able to get in ahead of that. Certainly, on our team, we're focused on trying to get ahead of the adversary, accomplishing their objective. That is our goal as threat hunters. I don't care where you are. You want to stop the adversary before they accomplish their objective. And so, how were they able to do that? And so you'll see those types of discussions, and the examples and the trends that they're talking about can be really useful for that. Now, I'll throw out a couple of reports here from CrowdStrike that you can go ahead and take a look at. We've got the Global Threat Report. This comes out typically at the beginning of every year, usually around February or so. Here is the link to last year's threat report, or rather this year's threat report in early 2021. The new one will be coming out here, obviously, early 2022. And then back in September, just last month, the Overwatch team and the team that I'm on specifically, we wrote and released the Nowhere to Hide 2021 hunting report. And you can get that from this URL here. These will be in the slides that should be going out with this, so you can just go ahead and download them from there. Either way, you're going to be looking at examples of what we've seen, and it's just another one of these reports out here that you can use. Like I said, plenty of companies have them, and I would recommend hitting them all that you can find and just trying to go what's of interest to you and what you can hunt on, what you can adapt to use inside of your environment. So here's some examples. Now, this is terribly not very elite, right? Just all they're doing is just dumping the SAM registry hive out, and you'll just see reg save HKLM SAM, and then they'll save it out to whatever file name that they choose. In this case, sam.out. This one's a little more complex. This is a PowerShell command, more of a discovery command. The actor gets into an environment. Honestly, most threat actors, when they get into an environment, they don't know anything about it, so they've got to start doing discovery to figure out where they are. What system is this? Do I need to get to another system for it to be interesting? And so they'll do commands like this. In this case, we're harvesting for computers inside of the environment, and we've got looking for IP addresses, operating system, service pack level, and then it's dumping it out to a table for them to use. It's basically a list. So a little bit more complex, but this is something we could hunt on. How often does this really occur in our environment? And if it does happen regularly, let's say from a piece of software that uses this type of command to regularly poll our environment for information, we can filter that out and then focus on where it's not occurring. Here's another example attack, creating a service. So in this case, they're creating a service. We redacted the name to avoid giving anything away, but they have got this thing to start automatically. Here is the binary path, basically launching under a command prompt, and then here is the exe and the path to that. And they did it under C Windows /resources and then the name of the exe. So these are all things I can hunt on. Now there are things that we'll talk about when we do the hunt that we want to be careful of as we set up our queries to make sure that we aren't being too narrow, so that we can catch as many things as possible and give us the best chance of catching an adversary in the act. So with that discussed, let's go ahead and switch over to the virtual machines, and we're going to do a little hunting and see what we can find. So we've got two systems we're going to be using here for Detection Lab. In particular, just for a quick little demo, again, this is just kind of scratching the surface about how we would go about hunting this, and maybe some points on what I would recommend for as you're practicing and learning yourself. Now I'm going to focus on using our domain controller. This is where I'm going to execute the attacks. I could do this though on the Windows 10 machine as well, I suppose. But I'm going to run it on the domain controller, and then we'll switch over to Windows 10 where I've got Splunk Enterprise opened up, and then we're going to take a look at really just the basic search functionality. There's a lot of tools in here to dig into and see. They've created some dashboards and stuff like that to help spot bad behavior. That is certainly useful as well. You could turn in and fire off Atomic Red Team and let it run, and then go in and look at that dashboard and then dig into what those command lines look like, and then use that to inform what you're hunting for. But I still would prefer and recommend, as you're getting familiar with this stuff, go look at a threat report, look at what adversaries are doing. How is this tool used? Fire it off in this environment, and then go look for it inside of Splunk so you get familiar with how you're going to query it. And we're going to use Splunk here, but it could be Kibana or whatever you use in your environment. We're just using this as our log interface here. So I am already in CTools Mimi for Mimikatz x64. We can see that I've got Mimikatz in here, mimikatz.exe. I've got another executable named gimme.exe. That's actually just a copy of Mimikatz with a different name. Now, if I'm going to run Mimikatz, what this is going to do is capture whatever passwords it can from memory on this system. And so to run it, you probably want to reference this and do some lookups on it, because I constantly forget the syntax, but it is just mimikatz.exe, and then we're going to say, do is double quotes, privileges, 2 colons, debug, another double quote, and then we're going to do, this is going to be sec URL SA, double colon again, and then we want logon passwords, which is going to give us anything it can really, and then we're going to tell Mimikatz to just go ahead and exit out. And so if I can type, this should give us all of the execution of Mimikatz for the last little bit. Or excuse me, should do execute Mimikatz. And sure enough, it runs. And I haven't done any hardening on this system. This is just straight out from the Vagrant build. And so you could see here are passwords. You can see they're terrible passwords. The built-in administrator count for domain admin is 1 password 2 exclamation point. I mean, that's horrible. But so we've got that side of things. Let's say an attacker got into the system, they pulled down Mimikatz and they executed it on the system, and they started getting creds. Okay, so we're over here on the Windows 10 system. Inside of Splunk, we're going to go ahead and just click on the search and reporting link here. And the first thing we need to start out with is, hey, what index are we looking at? And there's documentation to tell you what indexes are here, but in this case, we're going to be focused on the Win event log. Okay, and there are a couple of ways we could do this. Now, it might be tempting to come in here and say, hey, this is great. Let's just search for Mimikatz, right? .exe. This will be wonderful. There's a comma, exe. There we go. And I'm going to change this to the last 15 minutes because I just executed it. And boom. Hey, there we go. We can see Mimikatz being run in this environment. We can see here is the command line right here that it captured. Now, to do this, to have it work, you have to have your Active Directory environment set to log command lines. And you can do that. Check out the, just do a search on how to enable audit logging for command lines. That's going to add a lot of information, and so be prepared for that. Don't just blast that out in your environment. But if you can do this, this is really useful. And I'll be honest, being with what I work with, I definitely focus on the command lines because I've got a view into every command that the actor's running. So okay, great, we spotted that. But let's say what happens if the actor does something else. They say, well, I know that they're probably looking for Mimikatz, so instead we're going to use a custom version of Mimikatz. And all right, I just renamed it, but we certainly have seen actors do that. There it is, gimme.exe. We've seen it where they have compiled their own versions and stuff like that. Doesn't match hatches or file names or all kinds of stuff. And so we're just going to run the same command again. Privileges, debug, double quote again, double quote, sec URL SA, double quotes, and logon passwords. And finally exit. And so we run this, and sure enough, we get the same results. But if I go over here, and we can see the timestamp was 12:06 and 23 seconds AM. If I was just searching for Mimikatz, obviously this isn't going to work out real well because it didn't catch the latest version, latest execution, because it doesn't match what we're looking for. So we could step back and maybe be a little bit more general and say, well, what about sec URL SA? Because that's one of the command options in there. Maybe we could find something like that. Aha, there we go. Now we can see that in the last 15 minutes we've got this execution of, oh, it didn't show up. What on earth are you doing? Did it not make it in here yet? There we go. All right, just took a second for that to show up. So now we can see here is our previous one, 12:06 and 23 seconds. Well, now we've got it at 12:10 and 23 seconds, again, oddly enough. Anyhow, we can see that this time it was Gimme that was being run, but we picked up on the sec URL SA. So that's one way we could look at doing this. But what if the actor did Mimikatz a slightly different way? Let's see what that looks like again. So we'll go back over here, and I have this saved up where we are going to just look for it with a PowerShell download command. It's going to pull down a PowerShell script and execute it in my environment. So we're going to pull it down from GitHub. This is coming from the Empire project. Actually, let me put it up here to the top where we can see that. There we go. And we're going to do that. And so if this works, it's going to go out, download Mimikatz from GitHub, and then invoke it on the system and hopefully dump our credentials out. And there we go. Now, how did that end up looking? Well, we can scroll up here to the top. We can see the output that was done. And, you know, it appears that we still have this, we launched this securl SA inside of the Mimikatz shell. So let's see what we find. Are we able to find this over here on the inside of Splunk? We may not be able to find it just this way. And so you start out here, we want to look for Mimikatz executing in an environment. So we refresh our query that we found that worked for all of this stuff. And it doesn't look like we're going to get it. So let's do invoke Mimikatz like this. And let's see that if that shows up in the last 15 minutes and see what that looks like. Okay, so here we go. Now we can see that this is showing up. We actually have several commands being executed here, events being logged for this, but we can expand this out and see, okay, well this showed up differently. We didn't see securl SA necessarily. And so this is going to have to change how we hunt a little bit. And essentially what you want to do is, as you're doing this, you find all of these variations. Here is just one type of attack, run three different ways, right? Just a vanilla download from the Mimikatz project, a renamed version of it, so we've kind of obscured something a little bit, and then a PowerShell execution. And you can see that we want to make sure we're not getting too specific, looking for mimikatz.exe. Let's focus on something that's kind of broad. Go for securl.sa. That should catch most command line executions, at least. And then, they do this via PowerShell as well, so I need to add another bit of another query to do this type of hunting, and so then you can build that out. So now you want to also look at how you tweak your queries. I mean, at this point we've got 2 queries to basically find these these events. Obviously, if I'm hunting Mimikatz, I want to try and combine this up as much as I can without getting super specific, but also take into account some of these variations. So maybe I want to, let's mess with this a little bit. I can always do an OR statement in here and say, well, okay, OR sec URL SA, right? And do another search for that. And then we'll scroll down here. We've got the invoke Mimikatz from PowerShell. That's great. We've got a whole bunch of executions of that occurring. And then, here finally at the bottom, and this is where we see gimme.exe with securl.sa in there. And so that starts to give us, tiny little bit more complex query, but allows us to catch more of these in one place. And so what I would recommend doing is you're looking at a particular type of attack, let's say Mimikatz, and I would focus it on maybe tools or specific behaviors. So I'm not trying to combine like multiple ways of harvesting credentials into one Uber query, but we're going to dig into Mimikatz. So what are the different ways I can execute that? And let me see if I can build a query to catch most of these variations. And then you want to periodically go back and, okay, fine, I've got this query, it's built, it's looking good, this is what I'm going to use, but then go back and keep testing, see if you can find other edge cases, other ways of executing it. Typically adversaries, they do a lot of some places will do a lot of groups will do a lot of customization of the tools. Others will just flat out, you'll see adversaries launch tools and they're downloading it from GitHub just like you saw me do, and there it is. So, just kind of get familiar with how that works, and just keep tuning it for your environment, and keep learning and seeing, how you can apply this to your organization. And then you would save this query and then come back and run it periodically, maybe have it run every few minutes, and then say an email notification or something like that if it happens. That's another way of just kind of running things in the background when you can't be there at the keyboard itself. All right, so let's Let's go ahead and take a look at one more technique that we see adversaries do fairly often. Again, I'm going to focus around credentials just to kind of stay on that theme here a little bit. We'll go back over to our domain controller here, and we've got this text file here, handy dandy, of my commands that I'm going to use. And let's just grab this one right here. In this case, one of the things adversaries will look at doing is they need to get a hold of credentials, but the host isn't set to store credentials in clear text. Basically, it's already been hardened for that. And so the adversary will come back in and say, oh my goodness, this isn't working. Let me try modifying wdigest and setting it basically to use logon, adding the registry key, use logon credential, and set the value to 1. Essentially, configuring the system to now store credentials in memory. And so we'll run that, and it completed successfully. And then sometimes you'll see the adversaries go away for a little while, and then they'll come back to see, hey, did anybody log in? Did I capture anything? Because it's not going to go back and decrypt anything, obviously. It's going to have to wait till somebody puts something into memory by logging into the host. So if we're going to hunt on that sort of attack, let's say we're interested in the wdigest type of thing. So we hunt for wdigest, and go ahead and search on that. And let's see what we got. We can find the execution. What do we got here? So this was the command, it looks like. No, haven't shown it up yet. Hasn't shown up yet. All right, hang on one second. We'll refresh that again. There it is. Okay, so it just took a second for it to arrive in our logging. So here you can see the command that I just ran. We've got the command line showing up here. Adding, to HKey local machine system, et cetera, security providers, wdigest. And that actually adds some information here saying, hey, this is what's going on, some background information to this particular type of event. And so we could hunt on that sort of thing. But, honestly, depending on how your environment looks and what's going on, maybe we want to just watch for any changes to the security providers at all. And so instead of being so specific on wdigest, maybe we back up and just, we look at that and think, well, let's grab this. And instead of being too specific here, and we'll paste in security providers and go ahead and search on that. Okay, that actually cut out a lot of the previous other noise that had been in here. And we can see, any changes into this key or under this registry key at all. And so this is another way of you just kind of dig into that. And, all I did to come up with this was literally just coming off of the Mitre Attack framework. So we'll just go back to attack.mitre.org. And this would be the credential harvesting. I can never remember which subkey it's under, so I'm just going to expand them all for credential access. And where are you? Oh, it doesn't have it in here as far as wdigest. You can just come up here. Let's search for wdigest from the interface for attack. Search box for it, and here we go. So modify the registry key. And so, all right, so this particular technique would have been more about modifying the registry, because the attacker is softening up the system and reconfiguring it. And so I was just kind of looking in the wrong spot. Anyhow, so in this case, you can come in here and see what's going on with this. Who are the actors that use this? And then you can see, let's see if we can find wdigest in here. There you go. There's one entry about it, about a particular tool. Okay, enables the digest by changing the registry value from 0 to 1. Well, 404 off the link in the site. So there you go. Here's the registry key that I was interested in. Wizard Spider modifies the registry key to this. And so this just kind of informs me of what this is. And then I would just kind of, okay, well, how would this be executed? Um, and so you just, check that out and do a quick Google search on that and then pivot along, figure out how the commands work. And then again, like I said, this is where you just come back to your lab, run it here in your TAC system, and then jump over to your logging interface and start figuring out how to query on it. This one was really easy, of course. There are many other ways we could go after this. And there are different things that you want to ask yourself as you're coming up with your hypothesis about how does this work? Well, how would an attacker go after my organization? Well, I run a lot of IIS web servers. So one possible thing that an attacker might do is I might think, okay, well, maybe an attacker gets a command injection, finds a command injection flaw. They're exploiting it in my environment. And, again, they get onto the box. They got to figure out where they are. What privileges are they running as? What's the IP address of this thing? So you might seem like, or want to harvest accounts, do discovery on user accounts. So they do net user / domain, or they go back to that PowerShell. They try and execute that PowerShell command that I ran or showed earlier from the our threat hunting report about where it extracted all that information from Active Directory and grabbed the host, the IP address, and the operating system and stuff like that. And so then you could come in here and just start building queries for that and start going after it and see, okay, can I find this in my environment? And if so, is this expected for my environment? And if it is, you'll typically see a lot of noise associated with it, and you can filter that out and then start to look for the unusual behaviors. And one thing that gets kind of daunting at first when you start this is you'll run into a lot of noise. Keep at it, because what I find and what I found in my own experience was as I was working in my own environment back when I was a security engineer, it was overwhelming. There was so much happening, but then I started filtering things. Okay, this is expected for this application. This is over here. That's fine. So we'll move that out of my view. And then I got to where I could spot the unusual behaviors in my network, and that allowed me to be basically a better defender and and threat hunter. So those are just some ways to look at doing this and to do some brief, quick threat hunting, really light, top surface, but it shows the process here, and that's really what we're after. Let's go ahead and take a jump back over to our slides and talk about some next steps. You're in here, you're practicing, you're doing this, you're getting familiar with it. What are some things that you can do next? I advocate just keep repeating and learning. This takes a lot of practice to get used to. It's like a lot of other things inside of IT and security. It's a perishable skill. If you don't lose it, it atrophies, and you have to go back and relearn how to do it. Like the 97th time that I've learned how to use Python and script out stuff there. So dedicate regular time to go out and do a little hunting. You don't have to do a ton to get familiar with it and get started, right? You just dedicated that regular time, let's say an hour or 2 hours, 3 times a week, or whatever it is you can carve out. So you do that, you do some practicing on that, figure out how to go from that threat intel down to a hunt. Go out there, read those hunting reports, those threat intel reports that are out there. Look at those techniques, turn around, use those as a tipper, if you will, to use inside of your hunts. Turn around and plug that tool into Detection Lab, run it. Okay, what does it take for me to find it? Right? And so, you just turn around, you run it in the lab, and then go for it. And then refine your process and document what you're doing. Make note of what each of these commands are. Or these queries are, so that you can go back and pick up on them again later, and you're not just starting over each time. So just keep going. This is something if you want to be a good threat hunter, you always have to learn. I can tell you, when I started threat hunting at CrowdStrike 3 years ago, what we were hunting on and what adversaries were doing was different than what we see them doing today, or at least what they're predominantly doing. You see trends and changes. I mean, there's a lot of overlap, but different campaigns that were really raging then aren't so much. We're seeing other things now. Now, if you are wanting to get into threat hunting, I'm going to assume that you want to look for a job, right? You want to get into this role. And so I wanted to spend a couple minutes talking about what we look for inside of Overwatch as far as in our hunters. One, we're looking for experience in people. And this can be blue team or red team. Like I said, we come from different backgrounds. You don't have to necessarily be a dedicated threat hunter to be what we're looking for, though we love to see that. But if you come in, you're like a solid forensic person, you're like, hey, I know how these commands look and stuff like that, but I want to get out ahead of this instead of diagnosing the carnage after the fact. Let me get in here and see if I can hunt it down and we can interrupt them before they get going. So that's stuff that we want to see. That's a great background for a threat hunter. We also look for curiosity because, again, we've got to constantly be learning. And so we have to have that inborn curiosity to keep driving us forward so that we can keep researching what adversaries are up to. We want to be persistent as well. Threat hunting can be really frustrating because you go out, you spend a bunch of time, you may spend several hours hunting something down in your environment and just come away and say, man, I got nothing. It's not happening here. That's good, right? We don't want to see that happening in our environments, but at the same time, it's frustrating to us doing the hunt because we're hoping to find something. So you got to be persistent. So be prepared for that. If this sounds like you, then you are potentially a really good threat hunter or a good candidate for threat hunting. And then document your practicing. Trying to get that experience, demonstrated that experience is really, one of the things we're always going to get asked this in interviews. So do things like record videos that you're doing in a detection lab and then publish them up to YouTube and then practice presenting what's going on. Write it up, put it into a blog post and write it up. And you sit there and think, well, that's kind of okay, but who's going to read this thing? Well, maybe nobody reads it, but to be honest with you, this gives you confidence in how you talk about it. You can do conference presentations. I used to like to do this all the time. I want to learn about something or other, so I'm going to go research into it and then turn around and do a conference presentation. And then internally, if you're hunting at work, document how you're doing your hunting at work, but we're not publishing that to the outside world, right? Keep this internal into your company, share it amongst your team members. Let's say you're a sysadmin or a security engineer, you're doing some hunting, document that and then spread the information around amongst your team members. Now, again, benefits of documenting everything out helps you talk about it during the interview. You can just turn around and tell stories. Well, I was looking for some reconnaissance or discovery type of commands in my environment, and I found where an Apache server was compromised, and I could see the actor turn around and look at bash_history and trying to get credentials that way. And you can just tell these stories. But you'll have that ready in mind because you spent the time to work at it, not only hunt it down, but write it up. And honestly, even if you're doing this at work in your current job, you can talk about how you have applied that sort of stuff into your current job and the results you got there, because that's fair game in an interview. So these are all useful things to help you get going and get into your first job as a threat hunter. I can't recommend this type of stuff enough. Really just doing the work, writing it down and digging into it, talking about it really helps you out when it comes time to get into that interview and demonstrate your experience. Now with that, we're going to open this up to Q&A via Discord, and thank you very much. Really appreciate you spending the time here listening to me today. Look forward to hearing from you. Talk to you later. Thanks.